Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this final 10th Bolster Regional Policy Dialogue and final Just Transition Helix Community event that is jointly organized by Crowdhelix and ECAS. Um, Before we begin, please note that this event is being recorded and will be shared through the communication channels of our consortium partners. My name is Julia Sandri, and I'm Research and Development Manager at the European Citizen Action Service, ECAS, one of the 12 partners organization of the BOSA Consortium, which is led by Tilburg University. Um, our colleague Nevelina will present the project in a moment, but you might be new to Bolster, and the project full name is Bridging Organization and Marginalized Community for Local Sustainability Transition in Europe, and is funded by the European Union Horizon Europe program. And the goal is to explore how marginalized communities and vulnerable groups are impacted by European Green Deal policies and to assess how involving them in decision making can increase support for sustainability transition. And as part of these efforts, ECAS and the consortium have been hosting a series of different events, and this is the last one. And the idea today is really to bring together international experts and practitioners to see how these inclusion of marginalized communities works outside the EU. We'll cover cases from Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, Ukraine to explore how citizen engagement tools can drive more inclusive and just sustainability transitions, particularly in low resources and high vulnerability settings. But to start things off, we have a couple of quick icebreakers question for you, which you have just popped it up on your screen. This is the QR code that you can scan in order to access these little slide of questions. And therefore, we'll love to know, can you go to the next one, where you are joining us from? So please let us know your city or region. And then we'll ask you how familiar are you with the topic of just transition. That's the next slide. But please take one moment to answer the question. Well, there are people from Belgium, of course, from Kiev, Bilbao. Things are popping up a bit. South Africa, excellent, very interesting. Good. Maybe we can move to the next one. So yeah, it's good. You all have solid background. That reassure me means that the discussion parts will be great. Thank you. I think we can move to the next slides. Perfect. So I was mentioning the Bolster projects works on including just transition policies, and our colleague Nevelina Pachava will explain it a bit more in a moment. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yes, perfect. So today we'll have several experts that will explain their research and their action in the fields. We'll start with Dr. Nevelina Pashova, Research and Innovation Advisor and Research Fellow at Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology Europe in Spain. And then we'll move to the case of Ecuador, which will be presented by Professor Emily Dupuy, who is Professor of International Relations at Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. And then we'll move to Chile, where Professor Alejandra Cortes Fuentes, who's Associate Professor at the Universidad de Chile, will explain her work. And then we'll move back to Spain, but also covering Argentina and Latin America with Dr. Ana Terra Amorim Maya, who is postdoctoral researcher at the BAS Center for Climate Change. And then we'll also cover Latin America, but from a disparate perspective, a bit from a more legal perspective with Dr. Mauro Pucheta, post-lecturer in law at University of Kent in the UK. And then we'll move to Lorena Centeno-Villa, who's working at the University of Miami School of Law in the US. And then we'll finish this part with the presentation by Anastasia Bushkova, who's energy policy expert at Ecoaction, the Center for Environmental Initiative in Ukraine. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Nevelina Pachova for the presentation of the Bolster project. Nevelina, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Julie. Thanks a lot.
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Just a disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, but I do work as a research fellow at RMIT Europe. In any case, I was asked to present briefly the Bolster project. As Julia mentioned, it is coordinated by the University of Tilburg. So I will give you a general view of the overall perspective of the project and maybe a little bit more in-depth insights into the exploratory research that was led by RMIT Europe itself. So yes, as I said, I will try to give you a brief update about the different types of research that were undertaken in the Bolster project, with a major focus on the exploratory research, which was led by RMIT Europe, that focused on deepening understanding of the local context across the different regions where we worked, and understanding of the perceptions and needs of the marginalized communities. But I will set it in a broader framework and mention a little bit about the participatory action research that we were doing, and a bit about the reconceptualization of the concept of just transition that is coming up and is led by another work package, so to say, as a result of the project findings. So next slide, please. So yes, as Julia mentioned, the project spans 7 regions, carbon-intensive regions that form part of the European Just Transition mechanism, which was a kind of instrument set up by the EU to support the implementation of its green agenda and transition. In the map in the top, small map in the top, you can see an overview of all the areas, regions in Europe that were included in the Just Transition mechanism. And in the framework of Bolster, we are focusing on 7 regions in Spain, the Netherlands, Spain, Belgium, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Croatia. And we have 3 other regions that were studied because of the historical transition processes that have taken place there. So the overall objective of the project was to find out if how marginalized communities are affected by the processes of decarbonization, and whether, and so how, engaging them in the decision-making processes can increase support for the transition. We are approaching the end of the project, so you can see a large part of the results, but we are still missing some. That's why I will just allude towards some of the conclusions. Next slide, please. I see it's probably not a very clear slide because there's an overlap in the table. I'm sorry about that. But that's just to give an idea of the type of research that we were undertaking. In the first line in the work package, 2 slides, you can see this is the exploratory research that I will focus on. And it is focused on the mapping of the governance of the just transition processes, deepening understanding of the marginalized communities, and visualizing the gaps and potential synergies. And I will also touch upon the other 2 type of research that that was undertaken in the project. One is the action research, which you can see under work package 3, on engaging communities in visioning and also implementing some small-scale community initiatives, capturing a little bit about the impact, and then reconceptualizing the governance in the context of the transition in the framework of work package 1. Next slide, please. So as part of the mapping of the Just Transition governance, we undertook an extensive both desk research and stakeholder interviews with more than 120 stakeholders from different governmental, non-governmental sectors and the private sector and just citizens. And the overall finding from across the 7 regions was that the just transition planning in those areas, those regions, was undertaken as a bit of a bureaucratic exercise, depending a little bit with the outreach and engagement of marginalized groups, depending a little bit on the history and the scope of the transition in each region. But civil society organizations and especially the non-organized communities on the margins were not necessarily engaged in the process, definitely not as deeply as they could or should have been. In this regard, their voices were not taken into consideration in many cases in the design of their actual plans. Looking at those kind of communities that were a bit left on the margins across the different regions, we saw that there was women and youth were among those that were most often considered as left behind in the different regions. So we decided to focus a little bit on those, plus an additional community that's context specific for each of the 7 regions, and to use those groups as the basis for more in-depth research. Next slide, please. So, as a follow-up step, we undertook in-depth kind of interviews with representatives from those community groups across the 7 regions. That included more than 100 interviews and engaged some of those community members in focus group discussions with participants of close to 150 persons. And the key findings of those type of discussions and interviews was that there is a notable mismatch between the official just transition priorities across the different regions, which were most often focused on industrial innovation, new alternative energy, development and reskilling, while the priorities of people living on the margins were very much focused on access to affordable energy, housing, green spaces, transportation, education, and health, which were topics that it was possible to include in the transition plans, but somehow they were not included, potentially, possibly also because those people were not engaged in the planning or not enabled to put their needs on the agenda. Next slide, please. This is just some word clouds of some of the things that were the keywords that were coming out from the focus group discussions, and you can see the focus on people, spaces, places being the most critical, so to say, missing agents in the formal official kind of transition frameworks. Next slide, please. So in a way to try to capture and visualize a bit this gap, we try to develop scorecards, putting together the perspectives of different types of stakeholders, including representatives from marginalized communities, local actors and policymakers, and the official just transition plans. And we are now in the process of updating them. But just to give you an idea of what they look like, next slide, please. We try to capture in terms of in a visual way the scope and of the importance of the different priorities that were flagged by in the course of the research. So as you can see, for example, in the just transition plans, there is a strong focus on both global and local environmental improvements, while for communities on the margins, vitality and connectedness were of critical importance. Local stakeholders were oftentimes kind of considering both. So in a way, they were aware of the needs of the local communities, and in this respect, they can be good kind of way to connect with the higher level policymakers, but also they do not necessarily reflect fully the needs and the priorities of the local communities. So the engagement of those intermediary institution actors should be also taken with care. And that's why also we decided it's important to give actually the opportunities to the actual representatives from those communities to put into practice and to try to find ways of addressing some of the priority needs that they had in the framework of the action research, which I will share later. But yes, next slide, please. And yeah, that's just the visual representation of one further level kind of down of the scorecard, and that reflect the differences in the priorities across the different stakeholders. And it's aimed just to break down further the priorities and highlight the ones that are silent, as we call them, the priorities of the marginalized communities that none of the other stakeholder groups shares or recognizes as important. That's why we wanted to give them visibility and to in the discussions to find way to discuss how to address them. We also identified some kind of converging priorities between maybe two types of stakeholders. In some cases, the marginalized communities and the local stakeholders. In others, those convergences are between the just transitional planning processes and then the local stakeholders. And then, as what you can see as the strong convergence, these are actually priorities that were mentioned across the different stakeholder groups. So there are opportunities for building synergies for addressing them, but they should not be done without the consideration of those silent priorities, as we call them, which in many cases across the different regions relate to safety, housing, childcare, community building, which seem to be to fall in between different more official categories maybe and needs. Next slide. So in a way to try to as a way to try to address some of those, especially the silent needs, as I said, we included a very important action, participatory action research aspect in the project, in which we engaged directly with representatives from marginalized communities across the 7 regions. In many cases, those were women, migrant, youth groups, also people living in social housing or people with disabilities. And they were engaged in reflecting on their needs, but also on their visions for the future. And they were supported with some small grants to try to implement, put into practice some of the ideas about how they can improve and address their own needs themselves, rather than just to provide suggestions for somebody else to resolve them. And the type of micro projects or ideas that were implemented through this the so-called Bolster Reactivate campaign were focused on hands-on environmental education and learning, community cleanups, community gardens, um, housing insulation in some cases, cycling infrastructure, and improved accessibility of different infrastructure for people with disabilities. So the results of both the discussions and the actual micro projects have fed into the discussions with the local policymakers, which is this other group of stakeholders that we've engaged with throughout the process. And we hope that this will lead to some broader changes and understanding of how marginalized communities can be better engaged in the future. Next slide, please. So yes, if we now move to the level of trying to reconceptualize a little bit the concept of justice based on the findings of the project, we can see that the mismatch is oftentimes not only between priorities. In fact, it is between the principles that lie behind the just transition, with the marginalized communities being interested not only in different things, but in a different way of doing things. For example, they do care about solidarity as an approach to meeting basic needs, or needs-based redistribution of resources, place-based revitalization, community-led action, hands-on environmental learning, and cooperative enterprises as a way of revitalizing the local economy. While currently the official just transition processes and planning kind of that are being implemented, they're very much focused on individual or on institutionalized kind of approach to meeting basic needs, merit-based distribution of resources, globalized resource flow and services, instead of ones that are being focused on addressing the local service needs. Oftentimes, actions are led by existing power holders rather than the local communities. And if there is a focus on generic reskilling in green technologies rather than in hands-on environmental learning that could also help to create changes in awareness and connection with the local environment, and thus contribute to a broader, more sustainable transformation. So there needs to be a move towards developing a so-called hybrid grammar of change. Because there seems to be different languages and different grammars being used both at the policy and the community level. Next slide, please.
Neverina, you have 2 minutes left.
I'm finishing. That's the last one. Thank you. So, as a way of taking this message on the need for more cooperative and localized and place-based approaches to the transition, overall, as a kind of the message from the project. There was a letter that was written based on the project results, but also including inputs from another 30 just transition regions from across Europe that included 5 major kind of points or recommendations on strengthening the just transition to counter political polarization, supporting local NGOs in fostering inclusive governance, unlocking the just transition regions as engines for reindustrialization, making funding more effective and accessible, and fostering local ownership to accelerate industrial transformations. So if you're interested, there are the details, the detailed subpoints for each of those points that are available, I believe, on the Bolster website as a kind of one letter to the European Commission that was signed by a number of different stakeholders. So you're welcome to have a look at that, and potentially we could discuss how this relates to the context, to the transitions in your regions. Next slide, please. And yes, pretty much this leaves us with, the open questions that we are left with as a result of the bolster. Two of the important ones. How is the just transition actually conceived and implementing outside Europe, and how is the European Green Deal affecting transition processes outside the continent? And I believe the aim of this workshop is to try to find kind of a pathway towards a shared agenda for building a transition that's both locally but also globally just. I believe that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nevelina, for this presentation of the lesson learned. And before we move to our first case study, I just wanted to mention that we have short question and answer session at the end. So you can please put your question already in the chat and we'll mention them at the end. And also that after that, we'll have just a few minutes for a last presentation on the Just Transition Helix Community brought out by Crowdhelix, just after the question and answer session. But now let's move to our first case study focused on Ecuador. Emily, you have the floor. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. I'm really glad to be here. I think my presentation is gonna connect with a lot of issues and aspects mentioned by Nevelina. So I'm gonna share some first results and reflections we have through this project of citizen engagement and community-based participation in the county river conservation initiatives in Ecuador. Next slide, please. So to give you a bit of context, and it's really interesting in this case, from the beginning, this is an initiative coming from local actors. So basically, we have been present in this region of the clouded forest in the northwest of Quito, in Ecuador, with other initiatives. And there we met with some local actors who came to us to see some researchers at our university and to say, look, we need your help. And we would like to collaborate with academia to produce some data to help us fighting against the river contamination. So you can see the picture over there. So it's just only one, but basically the river is highly contaminated. Then I'm going to show you a bit more about that. So we have a citizen alert on the river pollution due to anthropogenic activities, wastewater discharges from cities, and some intensive tourism activities. So basically, we said, okay, so maybe we can try to build a common research project, applied research project. And one of our key partners in the field, it's the No Occidente Relax y Aventura, a digital magazine. And it's really interesting because we are located in Quito, but they are located in the field. So it's really, really important to always have this balance of being like constantly in the field, but also having like some connection with the academy in the capital city. So the just like to end with this slide. So the campaign at the beginning, we launched the name Salvemos el County, saving the county, but it's more than a campaign. Like really fast, it has converted into a local organization movement of civil society. So this is really something key for the local actors to say it's not a campaign, actually, it's a movement. And it's like the basis of the project. So next slide. Okay, so just to give you a bit more of context. So this is like the area in the northern west of Quito, in Ecuador, and it's called Choco Andino, And over there we have a biosphere reserve recognized from 2018. And it's a territory facing multiple threats. So basically, I don't know if you can see really well, but on the left side, we have the start of the Rio Caoni, when you can read San Miguel de los Bancos, Pedro Vicente Maldonado, like on the really left side. So it's kind of outside, like it's in the reserve, but then it's outside the reserve. So where we are walking in, it's really an abandoned area of Chocondino, actually. But if we have a broad look about the region, we can see that we have multiple threats. We have deforestation, mining concessions, hydroelectric dams, water and river contamination, wastewater, waste discharges and garbage from Quito capital city. And we have climate change impacts with intense drought and flood periods and a lot of disasters also. So next slide. Okay, so starting from that and the call from the civil society, we designed this project called Participatory Conservation of County River and Endangered Species. So it's a 1-year project funded by the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, and the local NGO involved is Fundación Futuro Latinoamericano, and we co-implement the project with 2 universities here, and there is a lot of complementarity with local initiatives. Something interesting over there, it's like, as you can see, at the beginning, endangered species, it was not the priority of local actors, actually. But then we tried like to look for some international funding, and sometimes I feel like in academia we have like to look for a balance between like the priorities of international cooperation and international agencies and the local needs, exactly what you were saying, Nevelina, and like trying to have this participatory approach, it's like constant, because you can like co-design at the beginning the project, but then if you do not keep on maintaining this participatory approach, you can lose the trust of local civil society. So it's really a constant effort and process, and sometimes it's not easy, but definitely it's really important. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have 3 main objectives in the project. We are doing community-based monitoring of water quality and amphibian population. So you can see here in the picture, like the first wave of monitoring. So obviously, when we talk about community-based monitoring, it means that we are involving actively local actors. So the idea is that we are not coming just for 1 year, making some analysis and then it's over. So we need like to have some capacity building of local actors so that they are able to do it in the future, in the long term. The second objective is to develop a conservation mechanism for the County River in collaboration again with local stakeholders. So over there, it's not just about civil society. We're working closely with local authorities also, because they are the one taking the decisions, adopting new public policies, and it's really a challenge. But we do have to include them also. And finally, so we want to strengthen the community governance of the river. So exactly what I was saying, no, making building alliances between municipalities, civil society, communities, and academia, to build some strategic partnerships. Next slide, please. Okay, so we already developed some different activities, but I thought for this particular talk, it was really interesting to talk about this methodology. So it's called the community-based participatory mapping, and we call it also talking maps. So it has been really useful. So as you can see it in the picture, so we had different participants. In the first workshop, we had 30 people participating from all the County River, and we asked them to put different color stickers in the map of the County River to identify the critical places of contamination, the compatible and incompatible activities with river conservation, and the priority conservation areas. No, and then if we move to the next slide, we can see the three maps all together, because we made small groups to work on the maps. Actually, it's a really interesting tool because people had a lot to say. Actually, they had a lot to say. They know their territory. They know where we can find the most critical places. They have great ideas. And it was a really interesting space for different actors to meet and have the opportunity to talk. So if you see the map, so you can see, on the right side we have Quito, the capital city. On the upper right side we have Chocoandino, and then we have Rio Caoni with the different color stickers. And so you can see on the watershed we have both contamination and also opportunities to conserve. In the middle, we have a lot of red dots also, because we have a lot of intensive touristic activities, for example, and also productive activities. And at the end of the river, basically, it's the most critical place, to take action. Next slide, please. So to have some general reflections, around the topic of the talk, around local just transition. So I was thinking about grassroots initiatives for just transition. So basically, these are some reflections we had at the end of the workshop, where we worked on the talking maps. So basically, all the actors agreed on one important aspect is to promote citizen action, to exert pressure on decision makers at the national and subnational levels. So basically, we all agreed that we can have great ideas, great project from the university, data, but it's not sufficient if we don't have a strong civil society pressuring and influencing decision making. Is not going to work. No, and I maybe it's going to be nice to hear from different perspectives. But in Ecuador, for example, it's really important. Things are moving if citizens are moving. No. So yeah, so basically the idea is that obviously building alliances, we can demand the implementation of environmental regulations for the protection of the Kearney River. We also talked about preferences of local actors for some conservation mechanisms, because actually, for example, in Ecuador, we have a lot of options for conservation. And kind of many local actors said we would like to give preference to a protection action. So basically, recognizing that in Ecuador we have the rights of nature, and river also recognizing the constitution and some laws. So trying to say, okay, so the river is a subject of rights, and it has been like it's not respected basically. So we have like another precedent, another initiative with the Machanga River in Quito. So it won. So basically, like the local actors won their demand, their legal demand for the protection of the river. And in the county river, they would like to do the same. And I think I have like 1 minute left.
Yeah.
No? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. But something interesting again, they said, yes, maybe our preference is like to have the rights of the river recognized, but again, it's not sufficient. We need like to build on different initiatives at the same time to win our goal. No, next slide, please. So a few more, and just to end with that, a few more last reflection. We talked about also, for example, in September, hacked during the World Cleanup Day, no, and organized a massive cleanup of the county river with all the local inhabitants, civil society, the authorities to raise awareness, no, around the river. Also, obviously, something always key is to have political will and funding. We talked about seeking support from international cooperation agencies for water and biomass and treatment, for example. And finally, where we said that the role of academia is to help making progress on these goals, because like something always mentioned is that academia is not dependent on political changes, so it's more stable. So that's why most of the time, like local actors, they do really want to collaborate with the academia and in these participatory approaches. No, and I think it was the last one. Just let me see them. Yes. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for your presentation. We'll move now to the next case study, which is Chile, and I'll leave the floor to Alejandra. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia. Well, today my presentation is called Energy Transition Policies in Rural and Isolated Areas, a case study from Patagonia, Chile. This project was developed in a partnership between the University of Chile and the Energy Poverty Network, in which I also work. Next, Julia, please. So today, Chile, the Ministry of Energy, has developed a program to support the municipalities and local authorities on their energy governance. The program aims to develop local energy strategies, which is an energy planning instrument and management tool designed to enable municipalities to analyze their energy use, to estimate the renewable energy and energy efficiency potentials that they can leverage within their territory. And this serves as a basis for defining an energy vision and also a local action. This instrument also actively involves the community in the energy development of the commune. So this strategy is used to establish objectives and goals consistent with the specific characteristic of the territory, and this is the case, one of the case studies I'll show. Next, please, Julia. Next, Julia, please. Thank you. So the case study I'll show you is the development of this instrument in the Lago Verde commune that is located in Aysén region. This is South Chile, which has some particularities. This territory is, this region is one of the less populated of the country, with very, very cold winters and long winters and cold weather. The commune of Lago Verde is 100% rural, with around 800 and 1,000 inhabitants, more or less. And they are spread in 3 villages, Villa Amengual, Villa Tapera, and Lago Verde. And the population is quite scattered with very long distances between each of the villages. It takes you like 6 hours driving within each of the 3 villages of this commune. And the municipality also does not count with enough human resources. It's a very, very small team with no one expert on energy. So those were some of the challenges we faced during this developing this instrument. Next, please. So this instrument, in order to build this instrument, it has 3 big stages. The first one is a diagnosis, in which our team, that we are all experts on energy, we spend more or less 3 months doing this diagnosis with a lot of secondary data in order to analyze the territory, to evaluate energy poverty, to analyze the local energy management of the municipality, to estimate thermal and electric energy supply and thermal and electric energy demand, the non-conventional renewable energy, and also the energy efficiency potential by sector. So this is the first stage. There is a lot of data in order to make a proper diagnosis of what's going on in this area. The second part of this program consists in a participatory process in which we present, of course, summarize the most important findings from all these diagnoses, and then we build with the community a vision, objectives, and goals, and also an action plan in order for the municipality to be able to achieve those objectives. And the final process of this instrument is a validation, a technical validation with the local government and also with the municipality team. Next, please, Julia. In the energy poverty network in where I work, we have defined that a household suffers energy poverty when it does not enjoy equitable access to high quality energy services to satisfy its fundamental and basic needs, which may support the human and economic development of its member. In this definition that we made for Chile, of course, with a lot of literature review and all that, we estimated that fundamental energy needs are those that have direct impact on people's health, and the basic energy needs varies according to the territorial and cultural relevance. Next, please. So when we start studying and doing the diagnosis of Lago Verde, of this place, we apply a survey, which was quite difficult to implement because people does not have internet connection. So we did it by paper. And we found that more than 45% of the people use firewood heaters, and more than 30% use firewood cookstoves. And we also asked in this survey, like, how people feel in their dwellings. And they said that, especially in winter, how they feel it. And they said that 45%, for example, answered that they feel cold during winter in their whole dwelling. And 46% answered that they do feel cold, but only in some rooms. From the secondary data, we also found that there is a lot of power outages in this territory, that there are some houses without electricity, and that more than 45% of households use firewood for heating, and 99% use 45% use firewood for cooking, and 99% for heating. And also 18% suffer of multidimensional poverty. Next, please. We have also developed a concept that is called territorial energy vulnerability. That means all those threats and hazards that are beyond the household scale, that affects, of course, energy poverty also. And we found, for example, in this place in Lago Verde, there is a huge physical and digital disconnection. There is a very poor public transport and very, very low connection of internet. The municipality indeed is using now satellite internet, and some communities are using satellite internet, which is quite good. There is also a lot of dependence on traditional fuels like firewood because it's available, and there's a informal market, so it's very easy to have firewood. There is a lot of geographic isolation that hinder access to other technologies and alternative of fuels. For example, this whole territory of the commune does not have a petrol service, so people have to drive long distances just to put petrol on their cars. Also, as I said, the extreme cold weather with long winters and the limited and unreliable energy infrastructure. Next, please. So when we start developing this instrument, this energy strategy, we have a very strong participatory process. We did 5 workshops, 3 in Lago Verde, that is the village where the municipality is located, and 1 in each of the other 2 main villages of this territory. And we were doing a co-construction of the vision, of the objectives, and also of the goals that they wanted to achieve in terms of energy planning. And this was very, very successful. Indeed, we had a lot of participation, and we realized also that although they are in the same isolated territories, each of the 3 villages have really different needs and different objectives for them to be more developed in their energy use. Next, please. So we end up with this vision that was agreed by the three villages. That is that Lago Verde promotes energy efficiency and the sustainable development of diversified and decentralized energy sources that allow equitable and continuous access to clean energy. It is committed to the quality of life, natural heritage, and reduction of energy poverty. And this vision was also developed and aligned with 3 objectives that we co-construct during all this workshop. That is to develop and implement energy efficiency strategies in the residential, public, and productive sector, to decentralize and diversify energy sources, promoting equitable and continuous access to sustainable energy, and to promote comprehensive learning process in environmental education and energy efficiency. Next, please, Julia. And with all this objective, there is a plan, there is an action plan that is mainly programs and projects in which the municipality can get funds, different funding mechanisms, different financial mechanisms in order for the municipality to be able to develop all these goals and objectives. One of the recommendations we did is that special attention should be taken to the rural and isolated communities since they have less access to opportunities and support from public policies and programs. Although we were developing this instrument for planning, we also realized that in this context, there are some funds, there are some programs that are just not reached, some policies and some financial mechanisms that just don't get to these places. Also, it's essential for this instrument to guarantee stable, long-term financial systems and coordinate public and private resources to ensure the continuity of the project. Also, training stakeholders was something transversal that was in every workshop. We need to know, we need to be capable of understanding all the energy problems we have. So training was very important at all scales. And last, also monitoring and evaluating the implementation of the programs or any funding mechanism was very important for the people. So the creation of a monitoring and evaluating system would allow for measuring the impact of the strategies, identifying opportunities for improvement, and ensuring leaving no one behind into a just energy transition. Thank you very much. That's my last slide. Thank you, Gina.
On time.
Thank you. I have here the chronometer clear running.
Excellent. Let's move now to the case study of Argentina with Ana Terrabori Maya. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. I would like to start with a disclaimer that I am actually a Brazilian researcher based currently in Spain, doing fieldwork research in Latin America. So I'm doing fieldwork in Santiago de Chile, in Rosario, Argentina, and also we're just starting to work with the city of Santos in Brazil. And I was invited today to speak about the case study in Rosario, Argentina in particular. And a second disclaimer is the fact that this presentation is going to be a little bit more focused on adaptation rather than mitigation or energy or transitions. But the thing that connects them all is this need to create a shared vision to co-create together with local communities futures that are desired by them and not just enforced from the top down. So next one, please. So just to briefly introduce you, I am, as I said, a postdoctoral researcher at the Basque Center for Climate Change. It is located in Bilbao, in the north part of Spain, and I am currently working in a 5-year
ERC project funded by the European Commission called Imagine Adaptation, whose main goal is to explore new ways to monitor and evaluate progress in adaptation in urban areas. Next. So we start with this premise that thousands of cities around the world are currently planning, and many of them are also implementing adaptation actions. Next. But we don't really know how well they're doing or how badly they're doing because we're not doing enough measurement. We're not doing enough monitoring and evaluation. And the issue with that is if we don't measure, we don't really know from our mistakes or from what we're doing well. And if we don't learn, then we can't improve. Next. So the main goal of the Imagine Adaptation Project is to advance pioneering science for the evaluation of urban adaptation and its governance across scales. So these are our three principal pillars: adaptation in urban areas and to evaluate that adaptation. Next. So these are the cities that we're currently working with. So as you can see, we are working with Malmo, Sweden, Alghero in Italy, Seville and Madrid in Spain, Bristol in the UK, Bogota in Colombia, and the ones that I'm leading particularly, Gold Coast in Australia. And I'm leading our case studies in Santiago de Chile and Rosario, Argentina. Next. And then first of all, thank you for putting it all together, Julia. I think you removed the animations because it was item by item. That's excellent. So I wanted to first take a step back and bring us all to the same table in the sense of what is the goal of adaptation? If the goal of adaptation is to increase resilience, increase adaptive capacity, and reduce vulnerability, we need to first understand who is vulnerable, where these vulnerable populations are located, and why. What are the barriers, the systems of oppression and discrimination, and etc. that keep on making them vulnerable to climate extremes? So vulnerability is not distributed equally across the territory or across social categories, such as gender, age, class, and etc. It is related to socioeconomic, to political, and to historical conditions. And what climate change does is that it brings to light and increases existing inequalities. So then we have several studies in the United States that demonstrates that communities of color, low-income communities, children, and older adults are more likely to suffer from heat-related illnesses. Studies from the Barcelona Public Health Agency, for example, have demonstrated that women, older people, and residents from countries in the global south are the most affected by extreme heat and cold, and are the ones that struggle the most with energy poverty in the city of Barcelona. And in my own research, my PhD research, I also found out that it was women and immigrants from the global south and also low-income residents who were facing the most what we called thermal discomfort. So it was situations of experiencing extreme heat inside their apartments, but also lack of green areas in their neighborhood, lack of shelters to go to in case their houses were too hot. And those situations all compounded to create this thermal discomfort. So climate planning requires us to ask who is affected, where these people are affected, and how these impacts are experienced at the intersection of gender, social class, age, and origin. Next. So this is where the concept of intersectionality becomes very important. So intersectionality is a concept that comes from Black feminist thought, and it was coined originally by Kimberly Crenshaw. And it means the interconnected nature of social and political categories, such as you can see in this pyramid: gender, career, class, sexuality, age, disability, etc. But when I'll continue with the definition, as the interconnected nature of social and political categories that apply to an individual or group which overlap, creating unique systems of disadvantage and discrimination. So this is the important thing about intersectionality. It invites us to go beyond these static, fixed social categorizations to understand the vulnerabilities that happen when they intersect, two or more of them. Next. So what does intersectionality have to do with climate change? So it is a lens that helps us to understand how these multiple axes of identities and social positions shape experiences of privilege or of vulnerability in climate affected communities. So this is an image, for example, of this terrible storm and flooding events that happened recently in Valencia, La Dana. And then think, for example, about how a single mother who does not speak Spanish well would experience this flooding event, or a migrant man living in an overcrowded household, or a child with a health problem with unemployed parents, or an older woman who is living with a disability. So, this lens and intersectional understanding helps us to target action to those who really need it the most, and also to design policies that are more integrated and that can help address multiple problems at once. Next. And why is this important for adaptation? It is important because there is a current belief that adaptation has universal problems and solutions. And that's something that that works somewhere will necessarily work somewhere else. And that these policies and measures can simply be pretty much copy pasted. There's also a lack of pluralistic values and forms of knowledge and a dominance of expert driven and technocratic approaches and an oversimplification of adaptation processes. But what we know is that adaptation is not linear, it is actually iterative and it requires experimentation and learning and flexibility. Next. So here I come to the to talk a little bit about climate shelters. So for those of you who are not really familiar, climate shelters are critical urban infrastructures to support adaptation to extreme weather conditions in urban areas. So they are spaces that provides thermal comfort while maintaining their other uses and functions. So for example, they are your libraries and civic centers and schools who will continue operating as a school, but they will also be open at some times of the day to receive residents during episodes of extreme temperatures. There are, of course, other types of shelters if you're thinking about an evacuation shelter for a hurricane, but here I'm talking specifically about heat and cold shelters in urban areas. Next. So here are just some examples of existing climate shelters in Barcelona. So going from the top left and clockwise, we can see a civic center, a park, a museum, a library, and a sports complex. And they are all climate shelters open to anyone in the city. And they're all signposted and duly, you can easily identify them. Next. So, okay. I think there was a slide in the middle, but that's fine. It's completely fine. So during my PhD in Barcelona, I worked in a particularly heat vulnerable neighborhood. And in this neighborhood, I asked them, how would your ideal climate shelter look like? Because the city does have their specific criteria. You know, climate shelters needs to have a specific temperature. They needs to offer water. They needs to offer resting areas. They needs to offer a public bathroom. But for those who are the most vulnerable, who live in the outskirts of the city and who don't really have access to green spaces or even climate shelters, what would they really need? So this was an interesting exercise where they said, for example, that they really wanted the space to be outdoors, to bring more green to their areas. They wanted to go there with their families and friends, but also with their pets in some cases. So it invited us to think about these cases for multiple purposes, and also with to think about the diversity of people that will be visiting these spaces. Next.
We have 2 minutes to wrap up that.
Okay, that's great. Okay, and then as I was saying before, these climate policy adaptation policies should not be copy pasted, and because it worked in Barcelona, it doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna work in Rosario. So then we're now doing this exercise with people in the city council of Rosario, but also people at the community level in different neighborhoods in Rosario to understand what is a climate shelter in Rosario for the Rosarinos. what are the aspects of the existing concept of climate shelter that needs to be adapted to really cater to their specific needs. So then we ran a couple of workshops there earlier this year and also several interviews next. And we use the theory of change framework to structure our workshops. So this is, for those who don't know, it is an approach that allows us to organize our thinking and, based on our knowledge and experience, define the necessary conditions to achieve the desired change in a given context, and also to monitor our actions and to be accountable for what we do. Next. Yes, so very basically, this is the theory of change structure. We start with a shared vision and then we walk backwards. So after the shared vision has been established for the climate shelter in Rosario, then we want to think about the conditions that needs to be in place for that vision to be achieved. And then we think about the signs of change, which could also be called the indicators that will show whether or not we are in the right path, whether or not we are making the right moves and steps in order to achieve that shared vision. So we are now in this very interesting process of defining together collectively with the local communities the signs of change and the conditions for change for us to design a really robust and useful network of climate shelters for Rosario, for the Rosarinos. And next, this is my final slides. The key takeaway is that only by understanding what good adaptation looks like can we think of how to evaluate it. So we really need to have the shared vision in order to understand whether or not it is working well for the people who need it the most. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. And now we move to two presentations that adopt a more legal or law-based perspective on the overall Latin American situation. And I give now the floor to Mauro. Mauro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you. Okay. First, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Julia, and your team for inviting me today. As you have said it, my approach is going to be slightly different from the different speakers. So apologies if this is a bit boring, but it's going to be like very legal. I think when it comes to just transition, it's important to talk about this aspect, particularly when it comes to workers' representation. And one of the issues I'm going to be discussing is how informal workers' representation is protected or not in the context of just transition, particularly in the Inter-American framework. And why do I care about this? Why this focus? I think it's essential to address these challenges that are usually overlooked when it comes to global north discussions. And I think in many parts of the world, where you have, especially across the global south, informal employment constitutes the reality of roughly 60% of the workforce. So I guess if we're serious about achieving just transition, we must ensure that these workers are not only included in the conversation, but they are truly heard. If we can change slides, please. So just a brief outline into today's presentation. I will just briefly mention how some of these references of just transition and informality are included within the International Labour Organization instruments and declarations. I will highlight particularly the limited references made to informality. Next, I will briefly outline some of the common challenges faced by countries in the global south. Following to that, I will turn to the jurisprudence of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Due to time constraints, I will not explore each topic in detail. My aim is just simply to draw attention to several of these key points. If we can change the slides, please. Thank you. So, as you may know, the concept of just transition, this was originated in the 1960s, 70s, when trade unions in North America, particularly the United States and Canada, first began to articulate it. And at that time, trade unionists understood just transition primarily just as a set of support for workers who lost their jobs due to environmental protection policies. However, over time, this concept, this notion has evolved significantly. So when it comes to important international instruments that refer to just transition, I think we definitely need to look at the 2015 ILO guidelines. And I think in this respect, you can go and check those guidelines. There are plenty of principles But there is one that I think is worth mentioning, which is Principle 4, paragraph 19E, that refers that to provide, just transition policies should provide a just transition framework for all to promote the creation of more decent jobs, including as appropriate. And among all the different elements that I'm not going to mention, the last one, which is very important, is social dialogue, including the effective exercise of the right to organize a bargain collectively. Although it's worth mentioning, these guidelines are not legally binding. They do serve both as a policy framework and also as a practical tool. If we can change the slides, please. So, this commitment to a just transition was further reinforced with the adoption of the ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work. This was in 2019. And in this document, the ILO pledged to actually direct its efforts towards ensuring just transition to future work that supports sustainable development in its economic, social, and environmental dimensions. So, as we can see, this 2019 declaration reflects, I would say, a growing recognition within the international community that sustainability and social justice must go hand in hand. If you can change the slides, please. So now let's turn to the reference, I would say limited reference to informality in ILO documents. If, as I said, we check the 2015 ILO guidelines, you can see that probably there are two specific provisions that stand out. The first one is related to paragraph 27 that actually, and I quote, says government and social partners are encouraged to address the occupational and health impacts of informality and facilitate the transition to the formal economy and activities linked to the greening of the economy. And then we can check paragraph 29, which says governments, in consultation with social partners, should pay particular attention to the unemployed workers and those at risk of unemployment in communities and industries affected by climate change, resource degradation, or structural change. And now I emphasize this, including those in the formal economy. So as you can see, these references underline the need to recognize and respond to the vulnerabilities of informal workers. I think some of the previous presenters referred to the notion of vulnerability, and I think informal workers should constitute a vulnerable category, and especially in the context of environmental and economic transitions. And while this is not extensive, this reference to informality, I think they do constitute a step in acknowledging that actually just transition must also engage with those outside the formal labor market. If you can change the slide, please. So a second reference to informality can be found in a resolution adopted in 2023, where actually in paragraph 21, the ILO calls on governments, once again in consultation with the most representative employers and workers organizations, to formulate, implement, monitor, adapt, and periodically review national occupation safety and health policies. And this includes also those in the informal economy. So once again, I think these provisions mark a clear recognition of the persistent challenge of informality in the world of work, and it's relevant when it comes to just transition and when it comes to health and safety in the workplace. And we're going to move on to the following slide. This is the final reference that I'm going to make in terms of informality and the ILO. There's like the very recent resolution adopted on the 12th of June, this is a couple of weeks ago, that actually referred to the importance of coordinating just transition and formalization strategy to enhance the climate resilience of workers and economic unity in the formal economy. As I think these different provisions illustrate, there are indeed references to informality and to the importance of social dialogue. However, I would argue that there's relatively limited attention given to the role of informal workers representatives, despite the fact that in many labor markets across the global south, informal workers form the overwhelming majority. If you can change the slides. So as I said, we don't have much time, but I just briefly wanted to identify three key common challenges that we can find when it comes to just transition in the global south. And these are the one, you might not be surprised, you might be well aware of that, which is informal work. Labor markets in the global south are characterized by high levels of informality and precarity. Depending on the regions, these percentages can range from like 30 to 80%. In Latin America, that is roughly around 50%. And the issue with that is that informal workers often fall outside the reach of labor laws, social protection schemes, making it extremely difficult to extend the protections envisaged by just transition frameworks to those most vulnerable workers. The second one, which I think is a particularly important issue, given that some of the other speakers have mentioned the importance of participation, is workers' representation. So in this respect, traditional trade unions usually struggle to organize and defend rights of workers who are not formally employed. And this usually limits the effectiveness of social dialogue and collective bargaining, which are key pillars of just transition, and contributes to the exclusion of the informal workers' voices from policy discussions, particularly just transition policy discussions. And the third element is related to economic development strategy, which is this is a major tension between, particularly in global south countries, that lies between environmental goals and economic development strategies. This is particularly in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has left many countries grappling with debt, public health crisis. So in that context, the priority has been for many of these countries job creation, fiscal stability, sometimes eclipsing the importance of long-term environmental planning. All this compounded by the rise of some populist, particularly libertarian right-wing regimes, which actually have put forward some climate-skeptic agendas. Actually, what this creates is a challenge when it comes to addressing these three issues: informal work, weak representation, and development priorities. And if you change the slides, please. So I think yeah, I will. So one of the issues is I just wanted to mention. I'm gonna say only one thing. There has been issues when it comes to representation. For instance, when it comes to Jujuy in Argentina, some people working on this might know very well the example. There was a reform in 2023, and this reform in 2023 actually was a constitutional reform of the province, which in Argentina, provinces are the ones who are entitled to exploit natural resources. And this reform actually excluded indigenous people and also workers' representatives from the debates. And so all this was, it was the background. I guess it's background that I'm really interested in how workers, informal workers representatives, might be protected within the Inter-American framework. So we quickly change the slides. So and I'm going to just try to finish with this, is the Inter-American system, particularly Inter-American court, has recognized both some workers' rights as fundamental rights and the right to a healthy environment as a fundamental right. However, there is no express recognition of just transition as a within the human rights framework yet. But what I would argue is that it is possible to recognize in its recent jurisprudence the recognition. And if you change the slide, there is, I think, enough in the current jurisprudence to actually identify protection related to health and safety at the workplace, job stability, and the protection of vulnerable populations. And if you change the slides, there is also actually a couple of recent judgments that do protect the right to collective bargaining. And I think within this protection of the right to collective bargaining, informal workers representatives should be included in just transition policies discussion. And just to conclude, the final slide, on this, the 3rd of July, which I think is this coming Friday, the Inter-American Court is going to deliver an advisory opinion on the climate emergency. And hopefully we might have an answer whether all these elements related to just transition and the protection of informal workers as human rights, particularly the right to collective bargaining, might be included and might be considered a human right. So I guess we need to just stay tuned and see what they are going to say. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mauro. And Thank you for this important point. We will pay attention to what's going to be published. And we'll move now to Lorena. The floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Lorena. I'm originally from Chile, so I'm happy to meet Alejandra here. And very interesting what she's doing about energy poverty. And also, I'm very glad that Professor Pucheta speak before me because he described the international framework regarding the just transition. What I'm going to present today is a specific part of just transition litigation included over the scope of climate litigation. My research is focused on climate right-based litigation in Latin America, and just transition litigation cases is just a part of it. When I talk about just transition litigation cases are domestic court cases that we review and research in Latin American courts like a couple of years ago. And after we finish with a group of scholars, can we go to the next slide, please? A global network of review scholars on climate litigation. So we are a big group all over the world that we research climate litigation cases for all over the world in domestic court and also in international courts. So for the moment, until today, there are 156 scholars of all the jurisdiction, and all of us are submitting the summary of the cases where the main point is a case of climate litigation. So the climate change is the main core of the decisions. Let's go to the next slide. So we listened Professor Pucheta talking about just transition and how it started to be developed, this concept, because we have here about green transition, green just transition, or energy transition, and the concept developed in Europe and in America at the beginning, just focusing workers' rights. So what they wanted is to ensure that the workers have the minimum right after some kind of transformations, social or economical transformation happen. For example, in the United States, the Great Depression, and now we're experiencing the abandon of the fossil fuel dependence. But what we found out with the case study of the domestic court case in Latin America is the just transition or energy just transition include different aspects. Like one aspect is decent work, but also one other aspect of the just energy transition is the universal access to basic goods and service. For example, when we don't have these processes, when we have poverty energy, that is something that is happening in the global south. And also another aspect that is the main number of cases that we found out is the environmental aspect. So some of these energy transition projects are reproducing the same injustice that a traditional extractive project has arisen in global south countries, specifically in Latin America. So let's go to the next slide. So there is also procedural dimension of just transition. One aspect is the distributive justice, and here we can go deeper into the intergenerational equity. Another aspect is the procedural justice, which are the rights that has to be respect in all this process. One of these that is common to all the process, the right to information, the right to participation, and also with a lot of indigenous peoples involved on these projects, the consultation of the Convention 169 of the ILO, the restorative justice is also the right to remedy. Let's go to the next slide. So after we make our case research, we found out who are the litigants of the part that are involved on this just transition litigation case. So we have workers, but in a minimum number. We also have indigenous communities and people in general, the states, the civil society organizations, trade unions, companies, financial institutions, the courts, international bodies, and the nature, or how we call Mother Earth. Let's go to the next slide. So in our study, we tried to get to a definition of just transition litigation, and our definition tried to accomplish the reality of the Latin American countries that we studied. So Just transition litigation questions the distributions of the benefits and burden of transition policies and activities toward net zero emissions and climate resilient societies among local communities and affect stakeholders. Litigators typically invoke in Latin America human rights, but also may rely on other national and international laws and principles. Just transition cases are not necessarily pro or anti-climate action. Instead, they demand that climate action is undertaken in a just and inclusive manner with attention to those in vulnerable situations. So let's go to the next slide. So in Latin America, most of the countries are part of the Paris Agreement, and most of the countries submit the NDCs. We went over the review of all the NDC, and we find out that climate policy instruments do not incorporate just transition. So that is a policy that doesn't comply with that, except for the situation of Chile and Colombia. But at this stage, the countries are updating their NDC, and maybe we can find new evidence about the inclusion of just transition concept. Regarding the NDCs, NDCs are the national determined contribution. It's like the commitment of the countries regarding the goals of the Paris Agreement. So they say there in the international body how much are they going to do in order to go over the decarbonization. So mainly, the NDC concerned with employment, excluding other issues such as social issues, protection of vulnerable groups, gender identity, access to social protection system, and fiscal equity. Let's go to the next slide. So one important aspect of the scope of climate litigation, for those who are not like familiar with the concept, is all the litigation that is being developed at courts and where climate change is the main aspect. So what happens normally in a climate litigation is pro-regulatory. So the plaintiffs are going to court asking to the states to go further on a climate change goal, going further on the decarbonization. But on the other side, we still have climate litigation that is called anti-regulatory climate litigation, and here we can find just transition case. So the plaintiff of just transition case normally face a kind of backlash because normally they are going against the policies of the states because those policies that are supposed to be advancing on decarbonization are affecting them. This can be because they don't respect workers' rights, because they don't respect environmental law and they are being affected. They don't respect gender rights or the right of the people of disability. Let's go to the next slide. So we address in our report like the case from Chile. Chile has been a very ahead country regarding carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality for the Chile government is a goal, but needs to be coupled with the just transition strategy to protect workers and communities. Supreme Court in a case that this was one of the first cases that we have in Latin America in a domestic court regarding just transition, and it was specifically regarding the rights of the workers. The name of the case is Company Workers Union of Marítima Comercial versus the Ministry of Energy. What happened because of the goals of Chile regarding decarbonization? The government agreed to step in the closure of many coal plants. And the workers went to the Court of Appeal asking for the right to participation. They were not considered in this plan. So at the end, the Supreme Court granted the petition of the worker and ordered to the Ministry of Energy or to the government of Chile to include the workers in all the process of discussion of the closure of the coal plant. This was the only one that we have until now, because after that, I haven't seen any other cases of workers' rights. Let's go to the next slide, please.
2 minutes and then we need to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, this is I'm going to be short. This is the other case that is also regarding the lithium triangle, Chile is a case from Chile. This is one case that I mentioned here, but there are many other cases because has been a lot of conflict regarding just transition litigation with lithium. Why the lithium extraction is categorized as a just transition litigation? Because the lithium is the mineral essential for the batteries, and there is a lot of interest for companies or corporations trying to extract this lithium. The problem is like the lithium in Chile is placed at indigenous land, and also there is other environmental consideration regarding the lack of water. So in this case specifically, the indigenous went to court asking the government to annul a open call, an international contract that they signed with the corporation in order to extract the lithium in the indigenous line, and they say they were not consulted. So the main argument that they used there, it was the Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization, and the Supreme Court granted the case and ordered the government to make a new licitation and considering the voice of the indigenous. But this case has been given a new shade because now a lot of litigation cases are arising the lithium, use the argument of the environmental arguments regarding the environmental impact that the extraction of the lithium is causing in the land of the Atacameños, that is indigenous line. And finally, we have the case of Mexico. In Mexico, we had the Comunidad Zapoteca de Unión Hidalgo versus Electricity de France, and this was one of the several cases that Mexico faced regarding the energy transition policy from the government, and the plaintiff document impact because of the installation of aeolic plant and many other renewable installation in land, because they face impact. For example, women lost access to community lands used for collecting firewood, a vital resource for their household, exclusion from process. Only 12% of participants in the consultation were women who had no influence over the final decision, and also they face violence against defenders, environmental defenders. So the last slide, please, with the conclusions. Okay, so the conclusion is the litigation, the domestic just transition litigation are facing different arguments. The main argument is the environmental and climate justice and the extractivism. Also, at that time, we found out a COVID-19 argument, indigenous resistance, and also the litigation is used as preventing social conflict. And the next slide, please. So this is the picture of all the people who participate in this project. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this.
Thank you so much, Lorena. And now we go to our last presenter of today. Then will be the Crowdhelix presentation later on. But the floor is yours, Anastasia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. I'm Anastasia Bushowska, an energy policy expert at Center.
Sorry, we cannot hear you very well. Can you maybe increase? Yes.
Is it better right now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Super. So I'm Anastasia Bushowska, an energy policy expert at Center for Environmental Initiatives, EcoAction. EcoAction is a Ukrainian national NGO, and we focus on topics of climate, energy, and sustainable agriculture through impact and decision-making and building a community around solving environmental problems. Please, next slide. Super. The points appeared. So EcoAction has started working on just transition in Ukraine in 2018, when there was no discussion on just transition yet, and it was mentioned only in the ratified Paris Agreement. At that time, at EcoAction, we made a decision to start communicating with local coal communities who will be the most vulnerable to closure of the coal mines in the process of transitioning to a climate neutral economy. Specifically, the focus was on the Donetsk region, which is in the east of the country. At the time, the region was already partly occupied by Russian forces, so there was always a question of limited resources and impact of the war. And some communities at the time were as close as 50 kilometers to the demarcation line, so it always was a vulnerable situation. Um, the approach was at first to just visit the heads of the communities to talk about their problems, their ideas, energy efficiency, and renewable projects. And only through that, through discussions and simple communication and finding common grounds, the just transition topic evolved. And we discovered that the leadership of coal communities understood that coal is not for long, and we have to plan alternative future for the region. We also found that it is essential to support local civil society organizations because they have their audience and can more easily engage and communicate in the local context. All of that culminated in the creation of the platform for sustainable development of coal towns of the Donetsk region, and they were involved in creating the strategy for just transition of the coal towns of the Donetsk region. Uh, Although we started to work with other coal regions as well soon, and to be mostly focused on the dialogue, on supporting development of the positions, and helped those local actors to voice their issues and solutions so that they are seen on the national level and that there are national mechanisms which can support them. In 2021, the coal phase out by 2035 was announced because Ukraine joined Power and Pascal Alliance. And there was also a development of the concept of the state just transition program. We have been strongly advocating for all of that because we saw the need for enabling national policies which support just transition. But then 2022 happened, full-scale war and a lot of uncertainty and damage to infrastructure. As an effect of that, some of these communities, with whom we worked, are now occupied and relocated. Some are in active combat zone. So, to some extent, the future of just transition for this specific region is highly uncertain. Still, they are involved in just transition and are important actors to moving just transition forward. Despite the war, we had a strong network, and because of the previous work we have done, we managed to keep just transition afloat. In the end, even despite the war started, government reconfirmed the goals for coal phase out, and the major drivers for just transition became EU integration and reconstruction. And finally, after all these years and efforts, as of this year, we have state target just transition program accepted, and also local action plans approved in 2 out of 5 main coal regions. There is also an association of coal communities, but also at the same time, we see that just transition has to go wider because up until now, it has been focusing specifically on coal regions. But of course, we see that driving to climate neutrality also needs to consider other communities. So the next slide. Through all of this work, we had seen a few challenges related to a local work. And uh, first of all, it's that local actors are not always sufficiently understanding what just transition is or is not. Moreover, local population is often not sufficiently informed about just transition, how it's going to happen, what they should expect, what are the current processes. That's why we see the importance of cooperating with local civil society organizations. Although it's still also a challenge because in small towns, which are usually called towns. They are typically there are typically a limited number of active NGOs, and sometimes none at all. And they often focus on some specific narrow topics. Sometimes there are organizations which work specifically with people with disabilities. In some regions, there are, for example, organizations which work specifically with youth, and often they don't have expertise on climate and energy topics. Nevertheless, because there are those active local actors who are engaged in local processes, it's important to raise their role and strengthen their participation in just transition processes. Um, so, as I said, as a national NGO, we acknowledge the local civil society organizations' role and that they are powerful drivers of just transition, and we try to support them in that. Of course, Ukraine is vast and it's impossible to work with each and every community. That's why it is one of the more reasons to work with local NGOs. So in our work with local NGOs, we have several approaches how we do that. We do workshops, different trainings, webinars, provide brochures which could help them with filling the gaps, supporting in developing their expertise. Also, we try to support local transformational projects, simply different initiatives which can be related to just transition. Also, sometimes it comes to supporting these NGOs in communication and how they can talk about just transition. Sometimes it's in the form of trainings, helps them understand how they can communicate better. Um, Sometimes we also support with monitoring because, especially when the plans are approved, you have to find ways how these local actors can be more active in monitoring what is happening and how it is related to the needs of those with whom they work. Also, sometimes, can you come back, please? Our work with local NGOs can also be related to analytical work. We help to find different experts, and most importantly, what this work us does is that we are creating a network between NGOs from different regions, and it also helps to um, fill the gaps in the expertise specifically, and also exchange experience and knowledge. Uh, Also, uh, what we need this cooperation for is it makes us easier to involve them in national and international events and processes. Often it's in the form of positions, and it helps us to advocate for the national documents and the involvement of positions of those local actors in the national documents. And the next slide. So, to put it shortly, the role of civil society organizations in our context and just transition is that they can be really driving, setting the trends, promoting new ideas, sharing knowledge. They can be observers and critics, and they can inform and communicate with the local population, whom we rarely can reach. And also, they can convey the interest of those communities to decision makers, uniting for common goal and mobilizing communities. Um, the next slide, please. So, through all of our work with communities, with NGOs, we have found that the keys to our success in just transition um, are a few factors, a few steps. And these are that we started to work with core groups of local actors. In some cases, these are the community leaders or just informal leaders or NGOs. We united in creating positions which were later used to advocate for including interests of the local actors in the national documents. We also helped local communities and civil society organizations with pilot projects, which could showcase success and new approaches. Also, we strengthened the expertise on the topic with analytical papers, and we built the community around Just Transition, which involved different actors and helped to strengthen the meaning and understanding of Just Transition. So, this is it from me, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Anastasia, for presenting the case of local CSOs in Ukraine. And now, we're wildly over time, but I would like to have at least 5 to 10 short minutes to have maybe just a very quick discussion. I don't know whether there are questions from the audience or from each of the speakers to each others. Otherwise, I have maybe one question for you all to see what is the main takeaway. So for me, I would like to ask you, for those who want to answer, if you have to choose one lesson that, according to you, from your own project, in your own either case study or approach, can be applied broadly in most other cases or regions. What's the main lesson that, according to you, can be more or less applied, say, everywhere, or from different perspective, legal, social, economic perspective? I fear that I've scared you with this question.
I'm happy to begin.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good. The very first, I'm gonna make it very, very brief, but I would say that every voice matters, which means that, when it comes to representation, we need to consider all the stakeholders, including, from my perspective, like informal workers representatives. So otherwise, it's going to be a bit challenging to claim that we are implementing a just transition policy or plan. We might, but I guess probably if we don't do that, we might just simply be implementing a transition policy, but not necessarily just. So I would say just probably every voice matters.
Thank you, Mauro. Anybody else that wants to answer the question or ask other questions in general? Yes, Lorena, please.
Yes, I agree with Professor Pucheta. It's like from all the case and experience, also from the litigation and from the social project, it's impressive how the lack of consultation or participation of the different actors. But I think going a little bit further, distributed justice is important in Global South. So the groups and the communities have to have a participation of the benefit of the just transition, because in many of the cases that I have been studying, all these just transition projects of the companies are not going to benefit them, so that it generates disparity.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to add?
I guess I could go next,
Yes, please.
if that's okay. Yeah, so I would highlight the importance of going to the places where you're studying, because it is one thing to study from outside and another thing to really experience the realities and the context there. And if I may, a second one is to include people not only in the consultation phase, but in the planning, the implementation, and also evaluation, so that their opinions are incorporated throughout the whole process.
Yeah. That's a great point. And one point that I remember from the Bolster project, because I'm part of that one, is, and that Nevelina mentioned today, that is sometimes the affected local community do not only have different priorities, but different principles, so really different views on the idea of just transition, of environmental and just transition policy. So the idea of going into the context and really knowing well the region, the population that you are working with is crucial to understand this difference really in the principles and not just the policy priorities that are tackled. Anybody else? Otherwise, we can move to the quick presentation by Crowdhelix on possibilities for further cooperation.
So this is Burçak, and I'm going to give you a little bit of kind of brief what we have done so far in Bolster, and I'm also going to flag some kind of future like current goals indeed, because Bolster project created a lot of impact, and we would like to continue having this impact spilled over to the other areas and to the other potential consortium for the future. Of course, there will be like lots of different goals. Crowdhelix is a collaboration platform, and then we are now here to ensure that the sustainability of the community is ensured. Because through Bolster project, we created a community, and this is the model that we used while we created the community. So this is a model, and I know now we have limited time, but after that presentation, if you would be interested in hearing the community and how we set up a community within the framework of a project and beyond, you may always contact us. So what we do in the projects that we are aligned, and currently we are involved in 40 projects including Bolster. We are creating a platform, and then we call that platform a helix, and then through that helix we make sure that all the stakeholders are communicating with each other, and they are well connected even after the end of the project. And within the helix model, we also organize impact events, and we also share further funding opportunities, and we also enhance the visibility of the project as a whole. So here are the helixes. Like, we have 50 helixes in total, and it is good that we have the flexibility to create new helixes in line with the upcoming needs. The name of the project, the name of the helix that we created for Bolster project is Just Transition Helix, and I would like to invite all of our speakers here to be part of this helix, so that we will be finding a path for further collaboration. Currently, we have 365 members across 169 organizations from 47 countries in the Helix platform, and it is like, and its impact is really accelerated through the other members of the consortium. So here it is. I would like to share with you very quickly and very briefly the calls that I think like you are already familiar with these calls, but I would like to highlight it once again. Maybe we will be able to collaborate together. So I think for the future, of course, there are some similar calls and like some complementary calls under different clusters. But as this is kind of like a bottom-up call, I would like to especially highlight the European innovation ecosystems, and also European like also some kind of like calls on, they are called destinations. And as you can see in the screen, there are some kind of like high-tech focused and regional focused calls in this term, and they're all open, and then we can truly collaborate following Bolster, because Bolster will be ending in the beginning of August. So the other calls are here. So it's expanding investment ecosystems, scaling up deep tech ecosystems, and they're all like the calls that I selected specifically for this gathering are about like setting up the ecosystems and enhancing the ecosystems. So I hope they will all attract your attention, and we will be having some kind of further talks with you on how we can spill over the impact of Bolster project together. I know that there will be some continuation projects from the colleagues who are already member of Bolster, but I hope there will be additional ones. So what we also do, like within our system, is that we are also doing some kind of peer review of the projects when we work with our members or when we work with our with the project partners that we collaborate with. This is a new tool that we generated, and in this new tool, we are all able to see some kind of evaluation summary report when we prepare kind of our projects part by part, like excellence, impact, and implementation. I know it is not really directly relevant with the topic of this meetup. However, as our main focus is really on the continuation of Bolster, we wanted to share it because if we will be able to generate a project together for the future, we will probably use and potentially use Review IQ in order to make sure that the project that we are going to submit all together will be of a high quality. It can be under pillar 2, it can be under pillar 1 or like widening. So this is kind of like a tool that we developed. So there are also some kind of like potential leads that are interested in attracting more partners in the project. So it is also possible for us to share this information with the participation of the speakers that we having here and with all the attendees and also with Bolster, of course, partners. And currently, all the Bolster partners are members of this platform, and they are. It is kind of like it can be it is ready to be used. So I invite all of you to use this system and model in order to make sure that like we are there for 2025 calls, 26 calls, and beyond. And currently, we have already started working on the 2026 and 7 work programs. So now, when we talk about like the way ahead, it will be really important for us to discuss all these with you. So you can just scan this QR code and you can be part of the Helix community, and you will be duly informed. And I hope there will be kind of like a continuation, as I'm saying. It is a very quick presentation, as I was asked, Julia. I hope it is like to the point, and I hope there are some kind of like takeovers. But if not, then my main point will be kind of like Bolster project was a milestone and is a milestone. This is why a report is a kind of common paper to the commission is sent, and that common paper is undersigned by most of the Bolster partners. And commission is asked to publish more calls about the areas that we cover. So now our final and ultimate objective is to make sure that we keep the partnership alive. We make sure that we use the outcomes of Bolster project effectively in the upcoming projects. We would like to also make sure that we are enhancing the stakeholders who are working in this area, especially like from Ukraine, from the other parts of Europe. It is important to extend all these kind of network because as far as we have been informed and we have analyzed indeed, European Commission would like to have more newcomers than the current well-known existing networks. So we would be really delighted to extend the network with your participation as well. So very quickly, these are the notes that I wanted to give. I thank you for all of you for your participation and for your attention.
Thank you so much, Burkhard. Thank you all for these events. It's a pity that we've run a bit over time, so the discussion was a bit cut short. You have a short feedback about how happy you are at the event. That's the story. These are the KPIs that we have to give the commission to prove that we are doing what we promised. If you want, you can fit it in. Again, thank you so much for your presentation. They were very, 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 very informative on many different case studies and perspectives. And you will find shortly the recording of this event available on our channels. And thank you again so much. And I hope we stay in touch. Have a good afternoon or day, depending on where you are. And if you want to discuss further collaboration, you can contact Crowdhelix for that. Thank you so much and have a nice week. Thank you.